Join our community by subscribing. Every click helps us share more stories like this one. The introduction. The autumn fog rolled through the small coastal town of Harrington, wrapping its fingers around dilapidated buildings and lonely streets. Stray leaves danced along the cracked pavement as the sun reluctantly climbed over the horizon, casting a muted light that barely breached the gray morning. Harrington, with its sleepy atmosphere, had always been a place where secrets lay buried beneath the surface, much like the bodies of those who had disappeared without a trace over the years. The air was thick with an impending sense of dread, as if the town could feel the weight of its hidden past. Echoes of laughter from children at the playground fought against the whispers of discontent from unwelcoming locals. Propped against the rusted antenna of an old car, a missing person flyer flapped helplessly, a reminder of the unyielding heartache faced by those left behind. Each time a name faded from those battered posters, a new chapter opened in the community's collective trauma. When Detective Sarah Mason arrived at the Xenia crumbling warehouse at the edge of town, she immediately sensed something ominous. Murphy's warehouse had sat vacant ever since the last fishing contract fled town, and the stagnant water pooling behind it spoke volumes about time's indifference. As she stepped inside, the stale air greeted her like an unwelcome embrace, offering little comfort. A faint metallic scent lingered, conjuring echoes of past violence that were stored within these walls. In a town shackled by silence, Detective Mason knew one immutable truth: the past never stays buried forever. The victim. As the cold tendrils of the morning fog reluctantly receded, Detective Mason took a moment to absorb the scene inside the desolate warehouse. Sunbeams pierced through the broken windows, illuminating cobwebs that hung like forgotten memories. It was here, among the refuse of past neglect, that the investigation would begin. A single spotlight focused on a weathered crate pushed against the far wall, beneath which lay the belongings of a young woman, Sarah Thompson, age 22. She had been reported missing 3 weeks prior, last seen leaving the local diner where she worked. The sound of muffled footsteps echoed in the shadows, and Mason knew this was not just a simple disappearance. Sarah was the kind of girl who lit up the room with her infectious laughter, known for her kindness and ambition. Friends described her as a beacon of hope in a town drowning in despair. Her aspirations of going to college had rippled through the close-knit community, earning her the admiration of many. The thought of something happening to her chilled Mason to the bone. She knelt beside the crate, pulling out a crumpled notebook and a pair of pink sneakers speckled with mud. In her notebook, hastily written entries bore the marks of a troubled mind, filled with thoughts that danced between hope and despair. The last few pages were smeared with ink, words nearly illegible, revealing a young woman growing increasingly lost. As the steady rhythm of Detective Mason's heart pounded in her ears, she resolved to sift through the whispers of this dread. Sarah's fate would unravel the threads of Harrington's darkest secrets, whether the town was ready to confront them or not. The crime scene. The stench of mildew hung heavily in the air as Detective Mason surveyed the grim surroundings of the warehouse. Shadows danced at the edges of her vision, and the stillness felt oppressive. She called in the forensic team, their blue uniforms contrasting sharply against the rusting steel and crumbling walls. Every creak of the wooden floor beneath her feet felt surreal, as if the very structure of the place was bracing itself to reveal the truths it had held for so long. A nearby officer began photographing the area, capturing Sarah's belongings with meticulous care. Detective Mason's gaze drifted over the floor, noting a set of faint scuff marks that led away from the crate. It was as if they had been left by someone in a hurried escapee, a sign that whatever transpired here hadn't been premeditated. The unsettling thought sent chills down her spine. It hinted at chaos and possibly desperation. In the corner, a broken bottle lay partially embedded in the concrete, glass shards glistening menacingly under the fading light. Mason crouched down, cautiously picking up a fragment. The jagged shape mirrored her own turmoil. What had happened here? Surrounding it were a few scrunched-up fast food wrappers and cigarette butts, suggesting someone had lingered here recently, perhaps even stalking Sarah. Just then, the forensic investigator called out. Detected blood on the floor. Over here. The grim discovery rekindled the flickering flame of urgency within Mason. She knew she was standing at ground zero of something far more sinister. The heart of a community was vulnerable when its darkest secrets bubbled to the surface, and it was her job to unearth the truth before it was lost to the fog once again. The early investigation. Detective Mason spent the first few hours following the discovery deep in thought, piecing together the fragments of Sarah's life. Back at the station, she sat in her cramped office surrounded by stacks of unfiled case notes and old photographs, flickering fluorescent lights casting an unsettling glow. The walls, once hung with commendations, now felt oppressively a reminder of both the town's unsolved mysteries and the burden she now carried. Mason knew the importance of starting her inquiries with those who knew the victim. She first reached out to Sarah's closest friends, gathering in the cramped conference room. It smelled faintly of stale coffee and burnt rubber, mirroring the tension that hung in the air. A circle of somber faces turned to her, apprehensive but desperate for answers. Can you tell me about the days leading up to Sarah's disappearance? Mason asked, her tone firm yet compassionate. As they spoke, fragments of Sarah's last weeks emerged. Her friends recalled late-night conversations filled with laughter, along with hints of anxiety about an alleged stalk. Intimate details fell like fabric threads in disarray, creating a tangled tapestry of dread. They mentioned a man who often visited the diner where Sarah worked, known among her peers for his unsettling stares and unintentional discomfort. His presence loomed in the background, an unsettling figure in a story that just turned tragic. The name sent a ripple through the room, a ghost they had learned to ignore, only for it to return with a vengeance. As the afternoon shadows deepened outside, Mason made her way back to her desk, the urgency of her mission gnawing at her. Without solid leads, they were at the mercy of time and dark secrets. The case was no longer just about solving a disappearance. It was a race against the clock to bring a perpetrator to justice before another life was lost to the shadow. The dead ends. Days turned into an incessant blur of interviews, ground searches, and agonizing hours spent poring over electronic records. Despite her relentless efforts, each lead Detective Mason pursued seemed to dissolve into nothingness. The man identified as Sarah's stalker was evasive, his whereabouts untraceable, and the witnesses' accounts became increasingly muddled with each retelling. Each call she made led her deeper into a labyrinth where truth felt just out of reach. Frustration clawed at Mason as she paced her office, a cacophony of voices echoing in her head. The case had begun to feel like a sinister game of cat and mouse, with someone always just out of reach. A knock on her door startled her from her reverie. It was Officer Green, looking equally worn. "Detective, I've been going through the surveillance footage from the diner. It's unsettling," he said, his face tightening. Mason leaned closer as he played back the grainy video on her computer screen. The flickering images showed Sarah behind the counter, serving customers with a smile. But lurking at the window, a man with hollow eyes and a predatory gaze watched her like a hawk. Every second felt like an eternity, and Mason's heart raced as she watched the replay. But the man slipped out of frame, fading back into the obscurity of the parking lot silhouette, slipping away like smoke. When she asked for a full description, it only resulted in a slew of conflicting details, each witness noting something different. The hunt for this man seemed to go the same way as their other leads, vague and uncertain, like shadows fading with the setting sun. Just as hope began to wane, Mason received a call from local authorities about an assault at a bar in town. It was a long shot, but it was a lead. They couldn't afford to let it slip through their fingers. With renewed determination, Mason set out, recalling the feeling of cold dread that loomed over Harrington, a darkness she couldn't shake. A break in the case. A chill danced in the air as Detective Mason approached the local bar, the Rusty Anchor. Its neon sign flickered in disarray, a fitting representation of the town's tumultuous atmosphere. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of stale beer and the hushed murmur of patrons. This place nurtured secret squint glances, averted eyes, and Mason could almost feel them seeping through the wooden walls. As she entered, she was greeted by the bartender, a balding man with a scruffy beard and weary eyes. He recognized Mason immediately. Over the past few weeks, she had become a figure of authority, hanging over Harrington like an ominous cloud. She approached him with a casual resolve, each word crafted to coax out information. "Can you tell me about an incident involving an assault last night?" she asked, watching for a flicker of recognition. With a weary sigh, he pushed a glass across the bar and nodded. "Yeah, a real piece of work. Some guy lost his temper, no one knows why. He nearly punched the bartender over being asked to leave," he explained. Mason's pulse quickened as the bartender described the man. Disheveled attire, wild eyes, and a demeanor that set people on edge. Her mind flickered back to the diner footage, the long-faced shadow fixed on Sarah. She pressed further, describing the details from memory. Did he mention anything about a girl? A young woman? The bartender furrowed his brow as he considered her question. Finally, with a hesitant tone, he revealed, "He did ask for someone named Sarah or Sarah." The realization hit Mason like a bolt of lightning. It was the first tangible thread linking the assault to her case. With newfound urgency, Detective Mason collected the bartender's contact information, promising to follow up. As she stepped outside into the hushed twilight, she could feel the pieces of the puzzle beginning to align, the darkness hovering just above her resolve. She was not finished yet. The shadows of Harrington were about to be confronted. The suspect. The next morning felt heavy with anticipation as Detective Mason prepared to confront the man drawn from the shadows of her investigation. Armed with a description and a name, Brad Harrison, a once familiar face in Harrington's nightlife, she felt a cold determination settling over her like a shroud. Local authorities had pieced together that Harrison had passed run-ins with the law. shaping a silhouette of a man with a history of aggression. She found him in a dreary motel on the outskirts of town, the neon sign buzzing overhead like a siren's call to trouble. As she approached room 22, the air around her went thick with foreboding repetition of the intangible tension that had marked this case from the beginning. She knocked firmly, knowing that observation was essential, gauging his immediate reaction. When the door creaked open, Harrison stood framed in the hazy light, his eyes darting nervously like a cornered animal. "Detective," he greeted, reluctantly stepping aside. The stale scent of cigarettes and despair wafted through the door, and Mason's senses sharpened. "I want to ask you some questions about Sarah Thompson," she declared, maintaining an unwavering gaze. In the sterile silence that followed, the unkempt look on Harrison's face spoke volumes, startled curiosity mixed with indignation. With every question she posed regarding his whereabouts the night of Sarah's disappearance, Mason observed the smallest tremors in his composure, the telltale signs of a man too close to the truth. Then she struck at the heart of it. "Witnesses tell me you've been asking about her at the diner." "Why?" he stammered for answers, insisting he was just a concerned acquaintance. But the way he avoided eye contact was enough to send alarm bells ringing in Mason's mind. Before long, Harrison's facade began to crack under the weight of her relentless inquiries. His stories faltered, shifting like sand beneath their feet. An uncomfortable silence lingered, thick with hidden confessions as Mason prepared to lay out the evidence. This was the turning point she had been waiting for, and the grip of the truth felt tantalizingly close. The trial. Weeks had passed before Detective Mason found herself seated in the back of a dimly lit courtroom, the air filled with the sharp smell of anxiety and sweat. The wooden infrastructure of the room exuded a solemnity that felt both foreign and expected. Now, as the trial against Brad Harrison commenced, the weight of the town's collective grief bore down heavily on her shoulders. Witnesses took the stand. Each voice resonated like a drumbeat of despair, recounting the events leading back to the fateful night. Mason's heart raced as she listened to Sarah's friends describe their last interactions, their eyes shimmering with unresolved pain. They spoke of their friend with love, detailing her vibrant spirit and indomitable will, while the atmosphere thickened with sorrow, each word a stab to the heart of the community. As the prosecution laid out its case, photographs from the crime scene were revealed, bringing gasps from the gallery. The haunting images of abandoned possessions mixed with memories of laughter and light, now stark reminders of a life cut short. Questions arose, defending the suspect's innocence and casting shadows of doubt on the evidence collected. But Mason held fast to the truth they had worked tirelessly to uncover. On the stand, Mason found herself sharing the details of the investigation. The late nights and painstaking efforts scarcely left unturned. The moments replayed in her mind, each step she had taken leading her to this juncture. In the final days of the trial, testimonies began to reveal cracks in Harrison's alibi. The tension in the room surged with each conflicting statement, and as Mason delivered her closing remarks, she painted a vivid picture of a man driven by obsession. The jury's gaze mirrored the ache of a community desperate for justice. The room held its breath, suspended in anticipation. Finally, the community of Harrington watching, waiting for a flicker of resolution amidst their collective fight against the lingering shadows of what had been lost. The aftermath. As the verdict reverberated through the courtroom, an uneasy silence enveloped Harrington. Conviction. The word echoed in Detective Mason's mind long after the jury filed out, leaving lingering uncertainty in its wake. Outside, the community pulsed with a mixture of relief and grief. On one hand, they had achieved a semblance of justice. On the other hand, the deep fissures in their small town's fabric had been laid bare. Life began to resume its routine in Harrington, but it would never be quite the same again. Survivors of trauma carry the weight, each whisper of remembrance, a reminder of that which will never return. The diner remained, its neon lights flickering against the backdrop of memory, but laughter felt muted, conversation stilted. Detective Mason found solace in the rhythm of her work, returning to her office enveloped in the familiar scent of old paper and coffee. Yet, the haunting image of Sarah continued to resonate in her mind, a fleeting reminder of innocence lost. She revisited her notes, looking for connections, patterns, anything that could help keep the town safe from the darkness that had settled. Community meetings sprang up like mushrooms after rain, discussions of safety, awareness, and vigilance dominating conversations across dining room tables. Parents hovered closer, and young women walked in pairs. Mason's phone buzzed continually, tips and concerns flowing from residents determined to reclaim their sense of security. It ignited a newfound urgency in her, the drive to prevent history from repeating. When she finally sat with Sarah's parents, the confrontation was heavy with unsaid words. They expressed gratitude, intertwined with grief, a thankfulness laced with unbearable loss. Mason listened, allowing their pain to wash over her, a reminder that her job extended beyond the badge and into the human experience. Resilience began to unfurl in Harrington, yet for Mason, the shadows remained tangible, never abandoning her. She knew that within every recent victory, echoes of the past would linger, a powerful reminder of why she chose this path. But she also understood that the pursuit of justice is never truly over. It required vigilance, commitment, and above all, an understanding that healing takes time. Reflection. Months after the trial concluded, Detective Mason stood at the edge of Harrington's coastline, watching the waves crash against the rocks. The sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of pink and gold, a brief moment of beauty in a world filled with stark realities. It was here she could finally breathe turmoil and anguish that had consumed her, began to ebb, replaced by a quiet resolve. Reflections of Sarah's laughter, the fear in her friend's eyes, the steely determination of her parents flooded her consciousness. Each life impacted had intersected with hers, tethering their stories to an unwavering truth. She had entered this case as a mere investigator, but she was leaving it profoundly changed. Mason thought about the second chances the families deserved, the peace long sought after, and the roads still littered with unresolved loss. She picked up a solitary stone, feeling its weight in her palm, symbolic of the burden she carried. Justice, while hard won, could not reverse the clock. Yet, it had sparked a dialogue that rippled through the local community, urging everyone to stand vigilant against violence, against silence. As she turned away from the water, the sound of crashing waves echoed in her mind, an eternal reminder of what had been lost, and an unwavering promise to keep fighting for those who could not.